Hey guys, this is miicrow. I wanted to talk about which artifacts are best from an armor and jewelry standpoint. Going into this patch, there's a debate of which armor class you should be going, and we're going to be talking about armor classes here as well. Overall, I think medium is the sweet spot of all artifacts, or of like all weight classes. Light is best for DPS that are trying to play more hit and run style. Heavy is best for people who just like to sit in a clump and not really think about doing anything else, and medium is a bit of a balance between the two. Medium does have this dodge dam change nerf, so Hardy effectively becomes a must-have perk, along with health, as we've discussed previously, is basically a must-have perk. So it's just not worth being super creative with those slots, and like your jewelry is slightly limited for your armor. You're slightly limited. I think it's a little bit hypocritical because I think health is honestly more mandatory than Resil was. Just Resil was a little bit overhyped before, so not a super big fan of the recent changes. But uh, overall, you need to play around whatever class suits you the best in terms of your weight pieces, and I'm gonna talk about the artifacts now. So getting into a tier list thing here, there are a lot of artifacts to kind of choose between when it comes to armor ones. I'll separate the jewelry runs here just so it's a little bit more clear, but you have a decent selection in terms of armor. Uh, in terms of like being in a light class, you're kind of limited by the weight. Tumbler feet wraps, I'll start from the bottom here. This is like a artifact that I think is best suited for medium because the actual fortify that you gain won't be as effective if you're in light, but the empower is still very effective, and the healing part is still going to be decently effective for light players. I just don't see it being best for all builds. Like a build like a blunderbuss, maybe if you want to do a little bit of extra damage, it could be good, but I don't think for most builds this is really what you want to be doing for light. For that reason, I'm going to probably put it in B tier in terms of like a light artifact. Like I think it's decent for light, but I don't think it's actually best in slot for most builds. The fortify will not get as much fi as it says. This 25% fortify is realistically going to be about a 5 to 10% damage reduction effect, which is just not very good for the amount of fortify and the actual dedication of an artifact slot. Moving on to the next one here, we got featherweight. Featherweight, I think, is like one of the best artifacts for light overall. It just increases your tankiness by, or your armor by roughly 33%. So this is roughly a 15% increase in how tanky you'll be. Fortify effects will also be increased. It's just like generally a good tanky artifact. It's good for PvE as well if you want to try to do some funny stuff with shields, like for trying to run a kite shield with a flail on light for some reason. You can get away with that with featherweight, and it's just like overall really good. I can go into it more depth later in terms of like how that weight class actually comes out, but this is roughly a 33% increase, and that 33% percent increase is like roughly uh like a 1.15 ish percent like uh effective HP increase. So it's a good artifact. It's better than Void Dark Plate is for heavy users. Moving on to the Gray Wizard's hat. I think this one's kind of interesting, but it's not super great. It's mostly used for builds that want the extra int stats because you gain 7 extra int points for this, which I don't think is like super beneficial, but it's okay. Brilliance won't be super beneficial for the majority of builds, so I don't find this artifact to be super good. I'd probably put it near the same like spot as Tumbler Shoes in terms of power level, maybe a little bit lower than Tumbler Shoes, honestly. Because I think Attuned Leather Pants just outclasses that, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. I forgot to delete it here. Attuned Leather Pants is another artifact that I think a lot of people are trying out. It just gives you a lot more stats. Your base stats is 32 at max level, so this is an additional 18 on your base, and you get 10 all other categories. If you go into 3 other categories, you're getting 48 extra stats. It's just very solid overall. This one I think is also an S tier. Like these are the two best artifacts in terms of light, and nothing else really comes super close. Ghoul Gloves, I think this is not a good artifact at all. If you haven't seen Ghoul Gloves, you probably won't ever see them. This debuff here, where if you transfer an effect uh, from you to your foe on a 3-second cooldown if the target's below half, I think this is good without the conditional, and or even without the conditional, I don't know if it's that OP. Like it's just solid, but with the conditional, it's just not useful at all. I just don't find it being super great. you have to be in a spot where you're inflicted with a lot of debuffs and you want to transfer one, so it's like a medium base build. I wouldn't be used for light anyway. So for light, this is definitely an F. A nimble coat, I think is really, really good for healers. It's really, really good for a lot of builds. I'm gonna put this in A tier. I'm probably gonna do I want to move featherweight or move? I don't think I could have like all these in S tier here. I'll probably move featherweight down a little bit because I think stats are generally more useful than being 15% tankier because it can get you to more thresholds. So I'm gonna rearrange that a little bit, but not a ton. Ginge head wrap I don't think is super useful for light players in specifically because those builds are playing to not take a lot of damage, and Ginge is kind of one of those artifacts that plays to you're taking damage and you're going to reduce the amount of damage overall that you're taking. The vigor passive side of it is actually pretty good for light, but that's like the main thing because that will reduce the amount of damage that you're taking overall. So I think it's an okay option, but I don't think it's that good. I'd probably honestly put it the same tier as Tumbler. I don't think it's like Gray Wizard Hat tier bad, but it's like generally not good. Freedom, you just can't use with light. Like you won't be light anymore. If Mag Gloves you can't use with light. Void Dark Plate you can't use with light. Unyielding you can't lose with light. So let's just get those out of the way. All these are heavy, and it's just not possible to be a light class with the heavy unless you do some like really really quirky things, which mostly involve running featherweight, which you can't do with another artifact. So in terms of the other artifacts on here, we have the jewelry ones. These are a little bit more interesting. Endless Thirst, I think, has the potential to be really good for light. The problem is Fortifying Toast is not going to be super strong. Empowering Toast is not as strong as we thought it would be for the current patch. Like, it's decent, but it's not great. And the Thirst makes it so that your potion cooldowns are going to last uh, like I think this is like overall a good artifact, but the potion cooldowns lasting longer, but having more of an effect is generally beneficial to light because you're not constantly getting into a fight. So I'd probably say this is like an A tier artifact. Like it's good, but it's not insane. A Blood Drinker has the potential to be good for, I think, later support builds, but most builds aren't going to want the trade-off for the uh, lack of DPS or the base damage reduction for the actual leeching effect. For a high base damage build, this is really like a 10% damage decrease, so or like 10% base damage increase. So it's not that big of a deal, but it's because this is adding into a bucket that's already highly contested. So this is like it has the in theory could be better for light. Like if you're a solo player that likes to hit clumps a lot and you don't like to take a lot of heals, this is a really good artifact for you. But for the majority of players, I don't think this is as good. I didn't copy that right. There we go. But it's a decent artifact overall. Lost Stopwatch, I think, is kind of a meme one. This is useful for PvE. You're not going to be using this in light for any sort of build. The activate taunt stuff, like, yeah, it's not going to be helpful from PvP. Purify is not very good in PvP. You can't run stam recovery with this. This is mostly a PvE tank artifact, and I think that's the only spot where it's really going to be used. And even then, I think Aang is better. Aang for light, I don't think is as good as Endless Thirst, because light players tend to be people that don't want to take a lot of incoming heals, and Aang will reduce the effectiveness of potion effects. I would go as far as to say for light players, Aang is probably a C tier artifact, but for every other class, Aang is like about an S tier artifact, so it's like very, very different. Let's move on to medium here. This is where stuff starts to change a little bit because we can actually use the heavy artifacts. So let's go top down this time because we didn't talk about the heavy artifacts before. Unyielding is actually pretty beneficial from a medium standpoint because you have a lowered actual uh, crit damage taken threshold for medium compared to heavy. So with Brazil, you'd be at 30%. Firestaff has a roughly a 50% crit damage modifier, which means every time they crit, you'll be taking about 20% increased damage unless you run this artifact. So based off of that standpoint, I think it's actually a pretty good artifact. It's not insane, but it's very decent. Like it's a good option. So I'd probably put it between A and B. I'll probably say it's high B. Void Darkplate is more useful for heavy than it is for medium. I think for medium, because this only increases your armor weight, it doesn't really have any other benefit. And even in heavy, this is about a 10% effective HP increase, so it's okay, but it's not that good. So for medium, I'd probably still say this is an F tier artifact. You should never consider it. Mag gloves are conditionally very good depending on your build, so it's like kind of a niche artifact, but where it's good, it's also good, kind of like nimble coat, where nimble coat's really good with healers, really good with fire stats, like really good with stuff that like tries to spam cooldowns. Mag gloves is really good for similar things, but mostly for utility players because you're reducing your crit damage modifier by a lot. It also could be good with pestilence because blunderbuss doesn't have a high crit damage modifier inherently. So this would just stack with it super nicely because he has played crits, and every time you'd crit, you'd apply a disease effect. And although that can only proc once per AoE, I believe all the little blunderbuss grenades count as different AoEs because there's 3 that come out, not 1. So I believe you could proc that multiple times with this. So it's like a niche artifact, but I think it's generally better than unyielding is, but it's like in a similar spot where it's like a little bit conditional if you want to use it or not. Freedom is just very solid. I don't think it's broken. Uh, it's basically it's like very close to being broken. This is probably our first S tier to be honest. The so like it has almost the freedom amount that you need to surpass the Warhammer cooldowns. The old freedom saying was you need 4 freedoms, so roughly 45-ish% to not be affected by Warhammer CC chains. So you do this, you run one more freedom, and you're good to go. So based off of that, I'd probably have to put this in S tier because I think it's just generally a good artifact to run for most modes, and you'll always benefit from running freedom. Also decent in PvE because it has Enchanted Ward, which is the best thing for PvE itself. So if you're struggling with like the Carmelians this week, this would be a good artifact in hindsight to actually run for that event, but not many people had access to it. A Ginge for medium I think is a lot better, but I still think it's like kind of in that niche category where it's not insane, but it's not bad. It's kind of in between there as well. So I'd probably put it with Unyielding, where these are like good tech options, but they're not necessarily like stuff that you want to build around. Both of these are solid artifacts though. Nimble coat, again, like very, very good. Same thing as with light. It just depends on your build. The extra 8% refreshing is 2 extra refreshing that you didn't normally have. With this, you're going to be able to get to 4 times 4 plus 8. So this is like 24% CDR. So it's like, it's pretty decent. It's not as insane as last patch, but it's not bad. And it's going to cost you less gear slots. So I think it's solid. I think it's probably like a low A tier artifact. Like it's decent, but it's not this for every single build in medium. It's a little bit better in light. Like light, this is a high A tier. I don't think it's quite S, but it's very very close. In medium, I think this is like kind of lower A tier, if that makes sense. Ghoul gloves again F tier. Just not going to be used for a lot of builds. Like there's like a niche spot where it could be used in medium that's like a little bit better than it is in light because you might actually be hitting foes that are below half HP because they're going to be in that kind of clump fight situation. And if you're going for an AoE based effect, you're more likely to transfer a debuff from you to the opposition, which is nice. It has Elemental Aversion, which is kind of the worst base damage reduction perk. Like this is really bad for current patch because of this, and it kind of messes up how you want to gem overall. Because you're going to have to gem specifically to Void to counter the Abyss if you run Elemental Aversion. The Elemental Aversion actually isn't very good versus most classes because they have a high uh, base damage, so Elemental Aversion just isn't generally good. So I don't think this is a good artifact overall, and we'll just leave it in F tier for basically everything until it gets buffed. Attuned Leather Pants, just good for stats, not much else. I think this is a little bit better in light because there's more light builds that would like to take advantage of this stat bonus. Usually using this stat bonus to boost DPS, not survivability, and those DPS-oriented builds tend to be in light. So, like for musket, for example, this is an S tier artifact, and for like bow, it's like a really good artifact as well. All those builds that like want a DPS increase, this is really really decent for you because you're going to be able to get to extra thresholds with that. For medium, I don't think those builds are as common, so I think it's like more of a kind of a niche tech one. A Gray Wizard's Hat, I don't think this is very good for medium. You should be running this mostly in light. That being said, you could consider it for a stat increase. So if you're running the Abyss, for example, and you didn't want to run Attuned Pants because maybe it gave you too much uh, Magnify and you weren't able to hit your specific thresholds that you want, this is a decent option because this is 8 stats. So it's like not bad, but it's not insane by any means. So uh, I would probably say that that's like a C tier artifact because it could be considered, but it's generally not good. A featherweight, probably a C tier medium. You can like it does help you a little bit, but it doesn't help you much from the stuff I've gone into. I'll probably make a separate video on featherweight itself because I don't think it's like really worth that derailing this whole thing for. But in medium, it's not going to give you that same bonus it did for light, like in terms of increases to your effective HP. A heavy chest is something you generally want to go for if you're able to go for it, so I don't think it's really worth it. So it's probably like a C tier artifact. Tumbler feet wraps. I think this is the best artifact in the game for medium, but it's really, really close with freedom as well. Shirking blessing, just the fortify is going to give much more of be much more valuable in medium than it is in light because your armor is going to be higher. And it's going to be optimal. You're going to be able to run an optimal mead setup because you're able to still get to that with a light feet wrap, unlike being able to run it in heavy, and then light, you're not going to be able to take advantage of that fortify as much. It does have physical version, which kind of sucks, but everything else about this is really, really good. So I'd still put this in S tier because the effect is like super, super strong, and it's very, very solid for medium. Endless Thirst going into jewelry now. I think this is less effective in medium because you're going to be in a clump. There's going to be more AoE heals if you're running medium. If you're not going to be playing to be near a clump fight, you probably shouldn't be running medium. You should probably be playing light. And because of that, I think Endless Thirst belongs somewhere along the lines of B to C tier. I'm probably going to put it in C tier because I don't think it's that good for medium classes. Blood Drinker is decent for medium classes, but I don't think is like the best artifact in the game generally. It's decent for support classes. So you think IGVG, you think flail builds, like Blood Drinker is decent for those, but I still think Ink is like generally better. So I'm gonna stick to putting Blood Drinker in probably about the C tier as well, and I'm gonna move Endless Thirst down one because I don't think Endless Thirst is super, super good for any build in medium because it's just not going to be how you play generally. I think it's been a little bit too harsh. I think both these are like C tier. Like they're nichely okay, but they're just generally not good. And also, I just realized that we have an extra spot open up here that I need to be filling, and I can't do shortcuts. Okay, there we go. Lost Stopwatch, still only good in PvE. You could stun stuff with Warhammer and it could last longer, which could be decent for Great Axe Warhammer, so I guess there's an option for some utility there because your stuns will actually be annoying at that point and Freedom will actually be pretty decent. So based off of that, I'm going to put this in B tier because I think this actually could be good for Warhammer-based builds because it has, like, those have active stuns. Your stuns lasting longer is decent. The problem is every time you stun someone, if one person hits them, it wakes them up from the stun. So I don't think it's like a great artifact, but it's like considerable. Like you can consider it for certain builds. Uh, Aang is between S and A tier. I'm probably gonna say that it's like kind of A plus area. Like this is very, very close to S, but I don't think it's quite an S. Uh, this will increase your incoming heals by like 60% basically. So it's just very good for that, but your pots are not going to be super effective, so you have to kind of build around it. If you go for the Aang Tumbler Shoes combo, this becomes an S tier, and because of that, honestly, I might move Freedom down to A tier, because I think Freedom's a little bit more niche than this combo, and this combo is just like kind of a best in slot medium combo. If you go for Shirking Heals with Aang, that's going to count as incoming heals, not outgoing, so it won't be reduced. You'll heal for about 6,000 every 5 seconds, which is a lot, and you'll gain a lot of old fortify. You're not hampered by not running that shirking for shirking heals because you have the tumbler feet wraps. So it's just like a very, very good combo overall, and because of that, I'm probably going to change how those rankings are slightly and kind of lock it in with Aang being an S, Tumbler being an S, and the others being a little bit further behind, but not much further behind for medium. Compared to light, you can see this is like pretty significantly different. Tumbler was a lot lower for light. Uh, Aang was like a lot lower for light because I don't think light players should be taking incoming, or shouldn't be relying on getting healed very often. So I think that's just a little bit different overall. Moving on to heavy here, we got unyielding and heavy. I think this is a little bit worse in heavy than it is in medium, but it is like something that you could consider for builds. Like I still think it's like a like kind of a tech option. Like this B tier is turning into like a possible tech for certain meta here or certain things. So this is kind of my tech tier at this point. Like it could be used in certain spots, but I don't think it's like always going to be good. I might move it down to C tier because I think it's going to be less good than it is in medium, but it's like overall decent. Let's start from bottom up this time because we kind of went the other way around last time. I'll just leave unyielding there. Eng, just S tier for heavy. It's like not even debatable. It's just if you're in heavy, you're going to be involved in a clump. You're going to have a lot of heals pumped into you. Eng just makes a lot of sense. The problem is it won't protect versus burst very well, and you have to choose between going for stam recovery or a ward, uh, which is kind of a tough situation. I think stam recov is better because this will buy time, and by buying time, you'll increase the amount of heals. So therefore, you'll just be better with that overall. You probably want to run invigorated with this sort of setup, like at least like I'd say try to get to around 60%. Even with that kind of medium base combo between the feet wraps and Aang, like invigorate is just very very good. But I still think Aang is like S tier for this class. Void Darkplate, you would think this would be an S tier artifact because it makes your heavy stuff more tanky. It really only makes you about 10% tankier, even though your armor is increased by 20%. And because of that, I'm going to have to leave this in B tier because I don't think it's meta, but I think it's like possible to tech in. Honestly, it might be a C tier artifact in heavy still because I don't think 10% is like worth the utility that you can take for some of these other artifacts. Mag Gloves, I think this is A tier because they're not losing anything and this benefits a lot of classes, kind of like in Medium, where I think this is just meta for most classes. This is not a, like a tech option. It's just like it's good for any support class. Mag Gloves, you're going to reduce your critical damage, but you don't really care about that in heavy. Uh, so it's just good. I think for flail this is good. For VG this is good. Basically any utility build, this is like pretty decent. So we're just gonna leave Mag Gloves in A tier. Freedom, I think this is between A and B. It's like very, very close. I'm gonna leave it in B again because I think this is meta, but it's not game breaking because you're still gonna need another freedom piece, but it's still very, very good. It saves you on 2 pieces. So you go from needing 4 freedom to 2 freedom basically because of this passive effect, and you will get over that minimum threshold needed to prevent CC combos unless someone is running the Lost Stopwatch. I forgot we were starting from the bottom up. I'll jump back and forth. Lost Stopwatch for heavy. I think this is better than it is before because you could actually take advantage of the stuns while being on point. So, but those stuns are more likely to be woken up. That being said, those players are more likely to run stuns. So any Warhammer base build that's on point, I think this is a decent option for. Uh, so I'm probably going to put this in low A, high B area. Probably I'll say high B. Blood Drinker, I think Aang is just better than Blood Drinker for most builds, and that also applies to heavy. Uh, I'm probably gonna leave Blood Drinker in C, where it's like it's a tech option, but it's like not a very good tech option. Endless Thirst, hopping back to this one, this is not useful on point at all. It's better off point than it is on point because you kind of want those cooldowns up a little bit more, and there's just better options jewelry wise. So I'm gonna say this is probably F tier, honestly. So I don't think it's even C tier. I just think Eng is like way too good to even consider Endless Thirst on point. If you're playing without a healer and you're on point, Endless Thirst will not save you, so I don't think it's gonna help you with that either. Tumbler Feet Wraps I think is B tier. It's a tech option, and it's actually not that bad in heavy, even though you're not going for an optimal uh, route because his Fortify will get more of an effect because you're running a heavier armor class. Then Power isn't as useful because you're not going to be building to do a lot of damage if you're in heavy for most builds. The the heal effect is also nice. I still think Tumbler Feet Wraps are between like A and S tier, but for medium they're just way better because you can get to an optimal loadout and you can still run them. Versus in heavy, you're gonna have to make sacrifices. So I don't think they're like meta for heavy classes, but they're a decent option overall. Ginge head wrap. This is like a little bit better than like B tier, I think. Like it's not like a tech option, but heavy classes are typically died at getting disease. So even though this is a medium, I still think this is like an A tier level artifact where it's a decent choice for a lot of people, because they're going to be reducing the effect of disease and dot effects, which also can apply a rend, can apply a weaken by 20%, and it's just overall very very good. This will also reduce the duration of disease, right? Because the disease effect counts as this. So this is invig and vigor. I can't write today with the pen. I'm sorry, guys, but it's like both those combined. So Ginger's just like very, very solid, even in heavy itself. Nimble coat. I think this just loses value in heavy. I don't think it's like a C tier level artifact, but it's like a low B tier level artifact. It's just not very good. Ghoul gloves still F tier. I don't think we really have to think about that. Attuned leather pants. The extra stats won't be as useful in heavy because they'll just be able to give you a little bit extra constitution, which you don't really care about as much. So this is probably a C tier level artifact. A gray wizard hat F tier. You're not going to run that for light build and heavy. Featherweight literally doesn't make sense to run in heavy. So because you're reducing damage or you're reducing the weight of something, but that doesn't benefit heavy at all. So it just doesn't make any sense. It's worse than any other normal piece. So this is probably what I would say. Heavy is roughly. Medium and light are like very very different. Like medium, I think the tumbler feet wraps Aang combo is just very very strong. Heavy, I think Aang is just like very very good. But Mad Gloves, Freedom, Ginge, like all these are decent options. Lost Stopwatch is decent for on point. Tumbler is decent overall. I'll let you guys like watch back the video though. I won't like ramble on about like which one is best. We've already kind of gone through that, but just know that they're very 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 different for different classes. Like you're building around kiting more, which is more important. Like you don't want to be in the fight if you're kind of newer to PvP or even to PvE. Like you want to be a little bit more away. Like for my PvE build right now, I'm running Blunderbuss and Light, and I'm not trying to be in the fight at all the time. I'm trying to be on the edge a little bit, and this is what I've been running for M3s. But medium, just go for that shirking heal setup. It's just super strong. Heavy, you're heal dependent, but you'll be very powerful with Aang. And then just like either go, I think it's mostly go Freedom or Ginge, depending on your preference. And then Mag Gloves if you're a IGVG player, you're trying to take advantage of some crit base effect. Everything else is decent, but not super popular for heavy builds. Like if you're an IGL, maybe unyielding is good for you, but that's kind of the only spot I see it being like super super strong. I think most people won't want to waste an artifact slot on this. That being said, it's a little bit better than Void Darkplate. Blood Drinker is okay, but it's just outclassed in my opinion. And because they nerfed it and they didn't nerf Aang at all, and it's just very strong right now. And the two pants won't do it for you. So that being said, I'll see you guys later, and in the next video.